Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. I assume you were here this morning when we had the presentation from Globalive. You heard the counsel, Mr. Infant, expounding on the interpretation of Canadian controlled. And he puts the word demonstrably in there, which is nowhere in the Act. But apart from that, he also puts in a little twist and suggests it's not a question of whether it is controlled by Canadian, it's a question whether it's not controlled by non-Canadian. And he makes a big deal out of that. What's your position on that?
I think Mr. Infant is quite correct in telling you that the test is whether the company is not controlled or is controlled by non-Canadians. I'm getting lost in my double negatives. But Mr. Infant was right in the position he put you in that respect, and I think the Commission said as much in the Unitel case. But the question really is what turns on that?
That's exactly what I was coming to. But in this case, these facts, as you just went, so what?
In this case, the distinction between whether you frame it as a positive statement or as a double negative is insignificant, because this company is so far out of compliance with the requirements of the Act that the answer is the same whichever way you formulate the question.
You place a great weight on the fact that they're so heavily indebted, and then indebted to the minority shareholder, who also is a main provider of technical advice and services. We heard this morning that that's really against their wishes, that they have much to use, quotes them, they have better use for their money than to invest it, to lend it to Globalive. They're doing this out of necessity, not because they want to, and therefore to say that this gives them an influence, is that at the earliest opportunity they'll employ it more gainfully elsewhere. What's your position on that? Does that in effect have an impact on our determination?
In my submission, Mr. Chairman, it can't have an impact on your decision. I think you put it quite correctly in your opening comments this morning. This company needs to always be in compliance with the foreign ownership and control requirements. It's not a question of having a reasonable plan for coming into compliance with those requirements, although I submit that you don't really have a plan at all, so much as an empty promise that they haven't been able to realize on up to this point. Parliament has made it clear that it's in Section 16, Sub 3, that the requirement to be a Canadian-owned and controlled applies at all times.
Yeah, and also there's at least I misread the Act. There's no provision in there to give temporary license or conditional license, etc. Either you meet the test or you don't. There's not the ability for the Commission to say, we give it you conditional that on 6 months you have a new Canadian partner or anything like that.
I agree with that, Mr. Chairman. And I didn't understand Mr. Infant to go so far as to suggest that either. The company witnesses expressed the hope that they'd be able to bring themselves into compliance at some future date, but there was no suggestion that the law gave you the authority to give them some sort of temporary exemption from the Act.
Now, you mentioned the Unitel decision, and you said it's not a precedent. And it's primarily on the basis of what? But I mean, that's only the one we have there, which is closest to this one, where there was a large foreign equity investment in the company.
Well, there was a 30% foreign equity investment, so about half the size of what you're faced with in this case. AT&T, and I'm sure I recall correctly, was not a provider of any debt. So.
AT&T was clearly a provider of technical expertise.
But was indeed a provider of technical expertise, but in a context where the two other shareholders that were concerned were both very significant Canadian corporations, both notoriously Canadian-owned and controlled, Rogers and Canadian Pacific. And they, I suggest, provided a significant counterweight to AT&T's potential influence. So long as that arrangement remained in place, this commission did not express any concerns about the Unitil situation where foreign investment was concerned. It's only when, as a result of the financial difficulties of the company, that the banks stepped in, that this commission investigated whether, in that context, AT&T had assumed control of the company, and found that it had not.
And on the trademark license, you raised an interesting issue regarding the duration, which of course is confidential. I can't disclose it to you. But you basically so that if it's 5, you should be very concerned. If it's 10 years, we should be concerned. What would be the appropriate length? What do you think we should look at and say, well, yeah, okay, that's a reasonable term?
Well, it should be. I'm not a marketing person, Mr. Chairman, but I have had some experience of the reaction of people to trademark license agreements of this sort in this sort of context, and I would suggest that, quite apart from whatever term there is on the agreement, there would need to be in place some sort of period of time during which Globalive would be able to transition to another brand. It would have to be some time that's sufficiently generous to it that the prospect of the termination of the trademark license agreement wouldn't be an imminent threat to the survival of the business. So,
come on, that's undoubtedly true, but you can do better on the term. I mean, you can't tell me very about 10, very much about 5, and not tell me what would be an appropriate term.
I think maybe I'm going to turn to Mr. Woodhead on this one.
Yeah, what I think we were trying to impart there is that if it's 10 or more, you're fine. If it's below 10, you're not. And the practical reality here, I think, to go to the point that was discussed earlier this morning about whether or not someone would do something or influence it in a negative way. The fact of the matter is that when you are in an operating wireless company, for example, at TELUS or at Rogers or at Bell, and if after 5 years, the owner of that brand that you've spent 5 years building up or using comes along and says, the brand is gone, all of your store signs are gone, all of your handsets marked with that mark are gone, I think that's a significant element. So the long and the short of it is, to answer your question directly, at least 10 years.
Okay, and on the technical services agreement, before Mr. Inton suggested we go into camera, the part that is on the record and which was confirmed by his client was that there's a fee which is payable regardless of what, plus there's a reimbursement for any services that are rendered, which basically obviously is an incentive then to use this contract rather than anyone because you're paying the fees in any event. And I must say I've never seen a contract that way. Usually what I'm more used to is you pay for the fees plus a percentage on top. So it's a cost of rendering the service plus 5 or 10 or whatever it is. Is this sort of standard in the communications industry? Do you have contracts along those lines yourself at TELUS, or is this an exception?
No, that's an exception, and it's a very one-way contract, but I don't know if Stephen wants to comment, or Mike.
Well, I can say from my own experience, Mr. Chairman, that I haven't seen anything like that before.
Lastly, your own, whatever he is, VP Government Relations, Mr. Hennessy, was quoted in the paper saying, well, clearly Globalive is here, is not going away, which I found obviously a reflection of how he sees the situation. Now, put yourself for a second in my shoes. You're here, you've heard the evidence. How would you deal with it? What is you said they don't meet it? What do you suggest has to be done to meet it?
Well, one of the things in thinking about this relates to that question. In my view, and I will answer directly your question, but in my view, This particular example is not like other ones that you have seen, where you could tweak a thing here or there and feel comfortable about it. This one, with the massive concentration of capital in Orascom, along with these frankly very unusual arrangements, and not to say that they're bad from their perspective, but very unusual arrangements, I think requires a redo. I think they need to come back with something that passes muster. Now, your question is, what might that be in our view? And I think we've talked about some of these things. I don't have redrafts of these things in front of me, but you've got to deal with the drag along, right? I think they've got to assure you that the brand is for an ample time for the company to utilize it, as I already discussed. Hugely, in our view, as you pointed out, is, and as I just said, the concentration of capital. They've got to do something about the capital and structure, and they've said much about the difficulties they might have in floating that debt. I mean, there is no doubt there has been an economic event here, but TELUS, we raised $700-800 million in the spring, in single digits. I can't say that they're incorrect, but I'm just wondering how much they're trying. The fact is that, yeah, I can accept that the cost of capital might be an issue, but it's unclear to me that they have made a case that the access to it is. So those are the things: capital, veto rights, assure yourself on the brand agreement, liquidity, and the drag-along rights, and those are the key ones.
Okay, thank you. Len or Peter? Go ahead.
I have one question. TELUS absorbed ClearNet a number of years ago, but ClearNet faced the same thing in 1994, I guess, and we're reliving a situation where ClearNet came in as a new player in the game, needed to establish themselves, and somehow, and I'm dating myself here, partnered with Motorola on equipment and infrastructure and everything else. They were a non-Canadian company. You got any views as to how that is a different situation than this?
Well, I actually went back and spoke to the people who were involved in that deal, directly involved in that deal. And in fact, it wasn't it was not non-Canadian. It was not found to be non-Canadian. How I would answer you, Commissioner, is that if Globalive had followed the ClearNet playbook, we wouldn't be sitting here today.
So what is different? What did ClearNet do that you find different?
A lot of these covenants about spending limits. I don't believe there was a drag-along right or these liquidity rights in there. The ties between the actual Motorola in that example would not be, and Madison Dearborn and some of the others who were involved in that were financial lenders. They weren't operators. There's a lot of differences, many differences.
Was the capital that ClearNet raised, to your knowledge, if you do know, at rates that were similar to what we're seeing in this situation? They were greenfield. They were starting from scratch. They had a.
I have no idea, but I don't dispute the fact that it makes logical sense that if you're a greenfield operation, you're going to pay a premium. Yes.
First question is, if Globalive were to launch, has TELUS figured out what its impact would be on TELUS, and how big would that be?
No, they will be a competitor. They obviously, they have some of these things that they're talking about, and will compete with.
Put it this way: would TELUS make more money or less money if Globalive launched?
I don't know. If there's another competitor, it depends on how they launch.
I was just trying to figure out how much skin you have in this game. The other question is in terms of Mr. Ryan, you mentioned that other operators have been able to raise capital, and how much? Can you give me some for instances? Mr. Woodhead just mentioned that TELUS was able to raise $700 or $800 million in the spring, but can you back your statement up with some for instances of companies in roughly similar circumstances to Globalive's who were successfully able to raise capital?
Well, what I was thinking of, Commissioner, was the fact that we aren't hearing the same complaint from Dave and the other new licensee about their ability to launch being impacted by their inability to raise capital. As far as I can tell, and I can rely only on press reports in this respect, they're not complaining that they've had difficulty securing Canadian capital to launch their businesses. So
So you don't know for sure if other people.
I don't know more than that.
Well, I mean, I would go further than that. Bragg, Eastlink, it doesn't seem to have any problem. Videotron's building out a network across Quebec. It doesn't seem to have a problem.
Sure, but so you see Globalive where it is today is roughly equivalent to Videotron and Eastlink?
I think that it has an enormous world, 15th largest wireless company in the world, standing shoulder to shoulder with it.
Oh, okay, so you're referring more to a Roscom than you are to Globalive, or in that sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, those are all our questions for you. Thank you very much. Madame la Secrétaire.